All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the next session, which is vehicle fraud investigations. I'm George Costandi, and I'm the moderator today. Just wanted to go through a few details with you guys. We'll be doing a live Q&A at the end of this session, so please feel free to submit your questions in the text box there on your screen in the GoToWebinar portal. And we will be addressing all questions anonymously. We'll be sending you a completion certificate in a follow-up email in the next week. And if you're having any technical difficulties, please feel free to send an email to us at webinar@origin-and-cause.com. All right, let's get started. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Michelle Bradley, who is a forensic engineer with over 15 years of industry experience and has conducted over 2,000 forensic investigations. Michelle's specialties include vehicle fire investigations, failure analysis, product liability claims, residential and commercial appliance failures, equipment malfunctions in sprinkler systems, and heating and refrigeration equipment. Today, we're also very fortunate to have Adam Graham joining us from a partner from Harrison Pensa. His specialties include commercial and insurance litigation, subrogation in fire, flood, automobile, and defective product claims, personal injury claims through accidents or the negligence of others. Also, his specialties include coverage matters relating to auto, homeowner, CGL, and personal liability policies, personal liability matters, and he's also on the preferred counsel list for LawPro, Ontario's professional liability insurer for lawyers. We'll pass out the mic to Michelle to get us all started.
Thanks, George, and hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Now, I really enjoy this topic of fraud, especially this day and age, because it is so relevant to what we're seeing in the field these days. Every time there's some sort of catastrophic event or recession in the world, the investigations that land on my desk consistently start presenting questionable physical evidence that may be characterized as fraudulent. Ever since March 2020, we've been seeing this same trend playing out. I can't look at every claim I investigate as potentially fraudulent just because we're in a recession time. A forensic expert needs to look at the physical evidence of every case with no bias and no preconceptions. We have to look at the physical evidence and translate what it expresses into a report. Things I see or don't see at a scene are telling me something as a technical expert. My job is more so as a translator than anything else. I understand the language that physical evidence speaks, and I translate it for my clients so that they can apply that information to their policy, whether it be to determine coverage, subrogation possibilities, liability, etc. So every investigation starts the same as presented here on this slide. We want witness statements, fire department and police reports, servicing history, what was done and when. We want to know the vehicle performance prior to the fire and a history of performance. I want to know the accident history through the insured or through a Carfax. Any photos taken just before, during, and after the fire, but before the vehicle is being transported, is really helpful information for us. It's important for me to know what the reported condition and use of the vehicle was before the fire. I will, before I go to do an examination of a vehicle, I will search for recalls, technical service bulletins, and blogs related to the vehicle, year, make, and model. I will sometimes determine the wind effects, so in those cases, I will require the vehicle orientation and the time of the fire. For some fires, I will also want to know if the scene is still available. Next, we need to document the vehicle or the fire scene. I start with confirming the VIN. This isn't always possible. Then I apply the same principles as structure fires, whereby we start from the outside and work our way in toward the area of greatest damage. Now, just a side note here, the area of greatest damage isn't always the area of origin. The area of most damage could be a result of ventilation or fuel load. If possible, I examine a vehicle where the fire happened. It's helpful in the best case scenario. There is often a better possibility of origin and cause determination when examining a vehicle where the fire has happened for two reasons. First, surrounding fire patterns around the vehicle will show the wind effects and the surrounding fuel loads. And second, evidence that has fallen from the vehicle is still there and can be retained. When a vehicle is moved, evidence will sometimes be lost. It used to be that tow companies were paid by the insurance companies to clean up the scene, and information that I've been told in the last year or two by tow operators is that they're not paid by insurance companies anymore to remove the fallen debris from a vehicle fire. Municipalities and the ministry will come along and clean that up, but oftentimes some of my evidence is in that debris. I realize this isn't often possible for me to view a vehicle at the scene where the fire has occurred, because if a vehicle is being driven at the time, it will have to be towed away. Again, this process stays the same no matter the circumstances. The more faithful we are to this process, the more vivid the evidence of fraud becomes, and the stronger my technical opinion is. I am going to talk a little bit about total burns and stolen and recovered vehicles because it's a question that comes up with clients quite often. In instances of total burns, meaning when a vehicle has been burnt to a crisp, and instances of vehicles being stolen and recovered, the physical evidence can be analyzed using other techniques, such as, depending on the age of the vehicle, a locksmith can assist with door locks and ignition cylinders to see if a key was used. They often have access to manufacturer specs for their anti-theft systems, as well as access to aftermarket security installations on vehicles. Depending on the extent of damage, the infotainment module may be downloaded and compared to the reported discovery and background information. We are often able to determine the pre-fire condition of the engine and transmission by having the fluids analyzed. Fire debris for flammable liquids needs to be collected soon after the fire since it can evaporate. Within days is best because it gives us the best chance of getting an accurate test result. When it comes to accelerant too, it's best if we understand that fire suppression water will dilute and flush away the accelerants, just like powerful water flow from a hose can also, it can destroy and throw evidence sometimes 50 to 100 feet away from a vehicle. I'd like to take you through a few case studies to show you the practical application of the steps I've just explained to you. So I'm going to do 2 personal line case studies and 2 commercial line case studies. This particular one is a personal lines claim. The reported information was that smoke was discovered coming from the dash area. The driver exited the vehicle and called 911. When investigating a fire, the origin must be determined through various means before thinking about possible causes. So working from the areas of least damage to the areas of most damage, I could see some surface scorching to the dash, but below this area to the left of the passenger footwell, there was much more damage. Now this photo was taken from the driver's side footwell, showing a similar amount of fire damage low in the dash in the center. This is similar to what was viewed in the previous photograph, but I'm also going to show you in the next photograph as well. Coming back to the passenger footwell, we can see the effects of heat causing the plastic to melt and drop down. We can also see the remains of the HVAC fan and motor. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but that's the fan motor. or sorry, that's the fan blades. They have fallen down from where they were installed above. What you can't see here is that there was not very much fire damage higher up in the dash above this area. None of the wiring harnesses or other components showed a high degree of fire damage. After the long strings of melted plastic had been removed out of the way, the center lower portion of the dash was examined. I ended up finding wads of napkins that had been placed in the area of fire origin. There was no evidence of any type of accidental ignition source in this area. The insured was unable to explain why there were wads of napkins in an area of the enclosed dash that is inaccessible unless panels and carpeting was moved out of the way. This is another personal lines fire claim I did. The reported information for this fire was that the vehicle was being driven at the time when the owner noticed smoke escaping the passenger side dash. He pulled the truck over, called 911, opened the front passenger door after he got out and went around, and then he moved away from the vehicle. The fire patterns in this case do not support a fire starting inside the dash. Instead, it looked like a fire that had burned in the footwell or on the seat and attacked the dash. The components inside the dash, so if you look inside the dash in this area, inside the dash cavity, they are in really good condition. And if a fire started inside the dash, these items would be damaged and consumed first before the fire has a chance to spread from the dash into the cab and up the base of the windshield. The footwell was excavated, and it was found that a large amount of packed and folded cardboard was in this area, along with some aerosol cans. During the excavation of this area, layers of cardboard were discovered. Now, this doesn't happen very often, but in this particular one, permission was provided to remove the infotainment system, which was in pretty good condition. The download of this module showed that the vehicle had been pulled over on the side of the road at this location for about 16 minutes, with the vehicle running and the doors opening and closing prior to the fire, causing the data to stop being recorded. In the center of this opening, I had removed the nav system screen, and this is the module that needed to be removed, and it was in really good condition. Here's a sample of one of the several reports that can be provided from the infotainment system, depending on the year, make, and model of vehicle. This was the download for this particular fire that I'm speaking about right now. The driver had reported that he smelled, then saw smoke escaping the dash, pulled over, and called 911 at 1:38 p.m. On this study, you will see at the bottom, this is time on the bottom axis, and on the left axis, that's the speed of the vehicle. There was no documented traveling of the vehicle after 1:20. And we had that the vehicle had stopped moving at about 1:16 that day. The fire department report showed that they were on scene at 2:05. The infotainment download showed that the vehicle was pulled over at 1:16 and the truck didn't move after that time. The only activity were doors opening and closing. Now, I'm going to review 2 commercial case files. This was a commercial vehicle being driven at the time when the driver reported some warning lights and smoke entering the cab from the dash area. On this fire, the reported information was that the owner of the vehicle was pulled over on the side of the road when a passing tow truck pulled over. The driver jumped out, grabbed his fire extinguisher, and quickly and efficiently extinguished the fire, much to the dismay of the vehicle owner. When I attended, I noted that the origin was small and located in the engine compartment beside or inside the fuse block. You can see in this photo that there is some surface deformation and scorching to the exterior of the fuse panel. This distortion to the material and the effects of heat were only present on the outside and were not present on the inside surfaces. So you can see some of these areas where instead of the smooth plastic of the original molded shape, we have the effects of heat and flame attack on the outside surface. But what you can't see when this was installed is that the areas adjacent to this location were completely unaffected by fire. This is a very targeted application of flame that we see on this particular surface. I examined and thoroughly documented the plastic body of the fuse block and the wiring harnesses in the area. When examining the wiring harnesses, I first examined the exterior protective cover called the loom. So these areas, the black outer covering on all of these different wiring harness segments, that's referred to as the loom, and it protects the wiring harnesses located inside. Inside are all of these wires inside each of them. The exterior and interior surfaces were examined after I removed all of the sections of the loom in this area. This allowed me to examine the wiring inside and the insulation then on each of the conductors inside these harnesses. Once all of the charred material and loom was removed, there was no evidence that any of the wiring had failed. The different colors that you can see here, we refer to that as conductor insulation. Inside each of these strands, these colorful strands, is copper wiring, and that's where the current flows. Each of the individual conductors then has this sleeve of insulation that you see, and that's what we are referring to when we talk about conductor insulation. Again, as you can see, only surface charring of the loom and some minor heat damage to the insulation of some of the individual conductors was present. In conclusion, the only reasonable ignition source for this particular fire was the direct application of flame. And this one might be my favorite. My final case study is a tow truck. And most of you have heard about the tow truck wars going on in the GTA for quite some time now. It's been on the news quite a bit. This truck in particular was parked in the operator's driveway, and he was alerted to the fire by a neighbor. This happened in the middle of the night. The truck hadn't been driven in a few hours, so that eliminated one possibility for me of hot surface ignition as an accidental fire cause. This left only an electrically started fire as a possibility or an intentionally set fire. In terms of determining origin on this fire, we compare the fire damage and corrosion effects on the interior and exterior surfaces of the hood, the right fender, and the bulkhead at the base of the windshield. So here is the hood. I am standing on a stool that I always have with me beside the passenger door, looking down onto the hood to show the effects of what I had started to determine might have been a pour pattern. So this is the bulkhead that I'm referring to, looking toward the front of the vehicle. And if you remember the amount of orange corrosion or rust occurring on the top surface of the hood, I'll show you. The underside of the hood, which has only just started to show some corrosion effects here at the very back edge, close to the base of the windshield. The underside of the hood does not show the extent of corrosion when compared to the top surface. This is our first clue that it's possible that the fire originated on the exterior of the vehicle and not inside the engine compartment. That's also the first clue for me that it's possible that this is an intentionally set fire. In the area of fire damage, now I don't say in the area of origin in this case, but in the area of fire damage in the right rear quadrant of the engine compartment, there was a considerable amount of electrical wiring that needed to be examined for evidence of electrical failures. When it comes to fire attacking wiring harnesses, if a wire is energized, it could still produce evidence of an arcing failure. That would be what we refer to as a result of the fire spread and not necessarily a cause. In this particular fire, there were no electrical failures found in the general area of fire damage. With the patterns on this vehicle, the fire burned intensely on the exterior surfaces of the vehicle from an accelerant being poured on them, in contrast with less fire damage and loss of material inside the engine compartment. On the passenger fender, we were also able to see the effects of an accelerant burning on the exterior surface of the fender in comparison to the photograph on the right, where my finger is pointing to a much less loss of material on the side of the fender that's facing the tire and facing the engine compartment. As you can see through my case studies, it's all in the physical evidence. I don't have to factor in the intent of the insured. The physical evidence tells me what happened. As a forensic expert, it is critical that I do not comment on intent that is outside the scope of my own investigation. Intent needs to be carefully determined by another type of expert, such as a lawyer. A lot of my clients call me with a bunch of information about the insured's financial situation or other circumstantial evidence, and I explain that my opinion will be based only on the physical evidence I observe and document. All other evidence will weaken the strength of my technical opinion if taken to court. Now, speaking of court, I'd like to pass the mic to Andrew Graham, an incredible lawyer and partner at Harrison Pensa. He will speak on the legal side of fraud and arson.
Thanks, Michelle. That was a very nice introduction and a very informative presentation. I want to thank you for inviting me to join you in this presentation this afternoon, and thank George as well and his team for including me. I want to just give a very high-level overview of arson claims, how to investigate them, what to look for in a brief case study. Obviously, I only have a few minutes today, and this is the type of topic you could probably talk about for hours. So I'm just going to hit on some of the highlights. But I did want to encourage anyone, if you have follow-up questions or if there's something that that you'd like to follow up with me on, certainly don't hesitate to reach out after. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Typically, when people steal vehicles, there's two reasons. They either want to drive them or they want to tear it out for parts. So when you see a vehicle that has significant fire damage, that's a huge red flag from the start. Something's gone wrong. There's a reason this has happened, and there's a reason for investigation. And as Michelle touched on, unfortunately, with these unsettled economic times that we're living in, arson and fraud claims are on the rise. This was evidenced during the 2008 recession. Statistically, we saw a significant uptick in arson claims, and it's our expectation that unfortunately this will happen again. So I think Michelle's already seen anecdotally some evidence of that, and I think that will likely continue as things are so unsettled. So any arson investigation starts with the arson triangle and proof of a deliberately set fire. So that's everything that Michelle just talked about, and really that's where we rely on the experts in origin and cause to show that there's an incendiary fire. That part of it is really with the expert. And just like Michelle said, we don't want her to cross over and talk about financial motive. We're in the expert's hands on that part. The second and third parts are more in your investigation. So the second part being a motive, and inevitably that turns out to be financial. So the financial motive is often shown in the documents or other investigation. I'll talk about that a little bit more in my case study. But motive is the second part of the arson triangle. Third is opportunity. Who had the last chance or the best chance to be on the scene of the fire? And there's all kinds of different ways that we determine when people were there, through cell phones and tracing, or through video surveillance. But actually being present and being the last person there often turns out to be a key part of the analysis. So when you're beginning one of these arson cases where you have a fire that you think is suspicious and you want to investigate it further, statutory condition 6 is your friend. And that statutory condition allows for an insurer to, it gives a number of powers, but most importantly, it allows an insured to submit an examination under oath. So you can have your insured come in and they have to produce for examination at a place. So they're examined and they have to produce reasonable evidence that you ask for. So you can dig in, you can obtain an undertaking to obtain financial records or maintenance records, all of the things that Michelle talked about earlier that she would want to see. And on the motive side, you get bank records, you get credit card history. On the motive side, we want to see records of the car. Is there indication that this car was having problems? Were there further repairs on the horizon? Is there reasons that there was a motive for the insured to set this vehicle on fire? So I'm going to take everyone through a case study from a case that we worked on at the firm. Obviously, I've taken out the names, but otherwise, I'll walk everyone through the facts. In this case, the insured reported a vehicle stolen from the driveway during the night, and it's found burned out the next day. So just like we talked about, that's a huge red flag all over the place, and you need to put on your investigative hat and start trying to determine what occurred. A determination was made in that case that an accelerant was used to start the fire in the back seat of the vehicle. So right away, you have the first part of the arson triangle confirmed, an incendiary fire. Once you have that accelerant used, that part of it was fairly straightforward. We then used statutory condition number 6 to get an undertaking to chase down the maintenance records and the bank records. It was interesting what the maintenance records showed first. Basically, the vehicle was a lemon. It was in the shop every other month for fairly serious repairs, and the insured still owed money on the purchase of the vehicle, and it was now needing a new transmission. The estimated cost of that was about $4,000, so there was a significant payment on the horizon if he was going to continue to have the vehicle. On the financial side, the bank records showed that the insured was in a financially precarious position. He was overdrawn on his bank account and had credit card debt. So there was certainly financial motive as well in the situation he was in. In terms of opportunity, the vehicle was in the insured's driveway and he had the only set of keys at the time. So anytime that you're looking at a vehicle fire, you always want to start with the keys for the opportunity element. Who had the keys or who had access to the keys, and start from there. All of the elements of a fraud were present here and the claim was denied. The interesting twist on this case was that the insured didn't give up. They continued with the claim, and our investigators stayed on and continued their investigation because it appeared that this may go to court. In this case, the investigators spoke with the ex-girlfriend of the insured, and she certainly had an axe to grind. So she knew of the entire plot to burn the vehicle and gave us a signed statement where she detailed what occurred. A few months later, the arsonist and the ex-girlfriend got back together. The insured at that point was trying to resurrect the claim, but we had the signed statement. And this example underscores really what these cases come down to, which is the importance of good old-fashioned detective work. If a claim smells, if there's something about a claim at the outset that that gives you pause, there's good reason to beat the bushes, hit the pavement, and try to track down answers. I recognize probably the majority of the people I'm speaking with are giving those instructions to someone in the field, and make sure that the people that are doing this investigation for you are turning over every rock, making sure that they're doing it in a fair way, but in a comprehensive way. And you know, look for the ex-spouse. Often, if it's not an ex-spouse or an ex-partner, there's somebody in their life that has a sense of what was going on. People that commit these tens of crimes also tend to talk, and if you can find the right person, that's a big help. Social media is a huge assistance to us in that effort. You can figure out who people are close friends with, and it's much easier to find people than it used to be a few years ago. So in summary, leave no stone unturned. Make sure that you're doing it in good faith, and obviously Adam mentioned earlier in his discussion the pilot case, and that's something everyone's very aware of, but that doesn't mean that the investigation shouldn't be thorough or comprehensive. Do things in a way that you don't compromise your case, but nevertheless make sure it's comprehensive. I mentioned social media, a huge tool for even doing your investigation. There was a case in Kitchener recently where there was a number of Walmart fires, and then the answer was actually just on social media. So the person that was involved in it, or they believe was involved in it, was tweeting about it beforehand. So do a full social media search. You don't know what information is going to be out there, but it's very helpful. And then everything comes back to the arson triangle in these cases. So take a look at the arson triangle. If you're not familiar with it, maybe print it out, stick it on your office wall or your cubicle wall or your home wall if you're working from home like I am today, and keep that close and think about that in arson cases. What would the motive have been, and what can you do to prove it? I think that summarizes everything that I wanted to say, George, if there's some questions.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. That was great. And what a complicated relationship. So thank you. I'm just going to take the screen now, if you don't mind. We're opening up the floor for questions. So please feel free to submit your questions in the little box there in the GoToWebinar screen. I'll get started with the first question. Using the vehicle example, who makes the decision for saying a fluid analysis and the value to the investigation? Does the engineer review the fluid and suggest that based on their findings and the relative usefulness of that fluid analysis, or is this only done as directed by the client or the handling adjuster? I imagine this question would be addressed by Michelle.
Thanks, George. That's a great question. So every investigation, of course, is unique. And I would not normally request that I take a sample, have permission to take a sample, spend that time, submit it to the lab, unless I had a reason. There would need to be some sort of reason. So typically in a file, I will attend and conduct a preliminary examination. And if I happen to see something that is relevant or might be explained by getting a fluid analysis done, either the engine oil or the transmission, those two fluids are primarily the main fluids that we might have examined in a lab, not examined in a lab, but tested in a lab and analyzed. I wouldn't normally have that done ahead of time or get permission to do that ahead of time. So typically I would go decide if the fluid needed to be retained, and get permission first from the client. Now, sometimes in a case like that, it will require a second visit. Other times, if it's decided ahead of time because of special circumstances, I might get permission ahead of time and take it while I'm there. The cost, the actual lab cost, is not very expensive. It's less than $100 to have a sample tested, and it will come back with different types of readings, such as different metals, for example, depending on what type of fluid is being tested. So it might show that you have a wearing of your piston rings, and that it's a vehicle that has either is about to or has already undergone catastrophic failure. So I don't have the question in front of me. I'm not sure if I answered it fully.
Yeah.
George. Okay.
Yeah, I believe so. Whoever submitted that question. Oh, yes, the person says yes, thanks. Okay, great. Next question.
Thank you.
George, I would add to that I've had
Yeah.
Michelle call me from examinations before on her cell phone and say, this is what's happening, this is what I'm recommending. Sometimes there might be a bit of an additional cost to that, but I certainly can think of a couple of files, Michelle, where we've talked on the day of, and communication between the instructing person and the expert is key, and Michelle's always great for that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, what is it that records the vehicle's movements and the door opening and closing? Michelle?
Okay, so that's the infotainment system, and sometimes it's referred to as the Burla system. So not all vehicles have that, and not all vehicles, even some vehicles have it, but there is not, it's proprietary software, so there isn't a third-party method of trying to get that information. There are other modules that can also be downloaded on a vehicle, but the information for each is different, such as for an airbag module, you would see if the airbags had deployed. For example, sometimes I will get to a vehicle and I will see that one or more of the airbags have deployed, and sometimes there is evidence of deformation to the vehicle as well as a fire. So we can download the airbag module as well. Sometimes that takes a little bit more time to excavate and get down to it, retrieve it, and do a download. But to answer that question specifically, for the vehicles that do have that capability, it's the Burla system or the infotainment system, which is, it's typically, not always, but typically just forward of the nav screen in the dash.
Great. What information, if any, can be obtained from a vehicle fire that has been burnt itself out? Is it possible to obtain ignition information or whether a key fob was used to start the vehicle?
So I'll take that one as well. If a vehicle has burned itself out completely, as in we don't even have rubber on the wheels, there's no tire rubber left. Typically in a situation like that, you would not be able to determine if a key fob was used to start a vehicle. In the past, for example, with GM, I know with their OnStar system, I've heard of one client who had success finding out information through the OnStar system, because that type of information is downloaded to a server remotely from the vehicle. But if it's information that would only be contained within the vehicle, that degree of fire damage will have completely destroyed everything and all chances.
Okay. I've got another question. Do arson cases typically get settled outside of court or in court?
I'll jump in there. So it's
Andrew?
yeah,
There you go.
That's always hard to say because we don't have a lot of statistics on cases that are being settled outside of court, but my assumption is that a lot of the cases are resolved without going into court, or even having a statement of claim issued and getting that far. And you know, the pilot case obviously provided a bit of a chilling effect on insurers, and I think to some extent still does. So yeah, my expectation is that there's a high percentage of these cases being resolved, although they're difficult cases to kind of saw off and reach a resolution, because they are very all or nothing.
Great. Thank you.
If I could jump in, I just want to add a little bit here on that one. So sometimes I will go and do a prelim and it'll look like it's quite possible that it's an intentionally set fire. And at that point, we hit a fork in the road. The fork in the road for me is either whether the insurance company has already paid out the vehicle or not. And why that's really important is if you have already paid out the vehicle, you essentially end up going through a process of, if I find conclusive evidence that it is absolutely an intentionally set fire, and you've asked me to write a report to that effect, it puts you in a less powerful position where you have to then subrogate against your insured to try and get your money back. The power for the insurance company, I don't know if power is the right word, but it's definitely a strategy. If you get a fire investigated rather quickly and you haven't paid out yet, my understanding, and Andrew can maybe supply a little bit of knowledge on this, my understanding is that according to the Insurance Act, an insured is required to cooperate once a claim has been submitted. So if an adjuster calls me and says, please go take a look at this vehicle, I take a look, I call the client and I say, listen, I don't like these patterns. It really looks like, for some reason, that it might be an intentionally set fire. I have really good evidence. Have you paid out the claim yet? And the reason I ask that question is because they can then get really great information from the insureds, as opposed to trying to ask questions and nail down things like a very specific timeline, exactly what happened, getting the phone records, getting the banking records. If the claim's been paid and closed out, they have less of an opportunity to get the background information that they need in order to move forward properly with a fraudulent claim. I'm not saying delay the paying out of your claims. I'm saying try to get an expert on your fire as quickly as possible so that we can go out and do a prelim and sort of tell you what the situation is from the field. I'm here, I'm looking at the vehicle, and this is what I see. And then that helps you make more informed choices during the claims adjusting.
Great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'd agree with everything Michelle said there, and it is just a question of timing, trying to get somebody like Michelle out to the fire shortly after it happens. You have so much more leverage before the payment is made under statutory condition 6. It doesn't mean that if evidence appears later, that you can't go and revisit it, but as Michelle said, now you're in a recovery situation without the same avenues available to you, so it is more difficult. There's no doubt about it.
Thanks. The next question here: if the origin of the fire is close to or near or next to an arcing that resulted from the fire attacking wires, is there a way to confirm it wasn't the arcing that caused the fire? Again, assuming that the source was very close to the arcing.
These are very tricky questions. I want to know who's asking these questions. So, Andrew, maybe you can take that one. So when we are conducting a fire investigation and we are trying to determine cause, we are never really able to determine 100% absolutely what the cause of the fire is. We have to use our experience, our knowledge, our fire patterns, the background information pertaining to what systems were live and what systems were not at the time of the fire, such as was the vehicle sitting and parked or was it running at the time? If there is an arc close to or near the area of fire origin. If I have an area of fire origin, I am then required to try and determine what all my possible causes are once I have established an area of fire origin. If an arcing failure is present, depending on the circumstances about that arc, is it midstream? Is it running over an edge? Do we have exemplar vehicles available and we can look at the same wiring on other vehicles and see if we have maybe the early stages of failure on exemplars? That coupled with the final word is that once I get to a point where I, along with other colleagues in the industry, if we're doing a joint destructive examination, we're trying to hypothesize and work through the different hypotheses regarding fire cause. When we come to a conclusion, if we have more than one, and I decide that one is more probable than another, that's what it boils down to, the balance of probability. So I could have two potential causes in an area of fire origin, and then my opinion sometimes will be that, as far as I'm concerned, this is a 50-50 shot, and I have nothing conclusive saying that it is one cause over another. It's classified as undetermined. If for different reasons, such as I have a bunch of exemplars all showing an early stage of failure in this exact location, and it's probably the arcing, again, it's based on the balance of probability. So my opinion would be based on the balance of probability on an entire investigation and all tools available to me at the time of the investigation.
Great, thank you. Guys, there are a ton of questions pouring in.
Oh, geez.
That's great. People are liking what you, liking the content, which is great. Next question. Would a credit score be something you could look at regarding intent? Let's do some rapid fire response because we have 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's Andrew's question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, short answer is credit score speaks to your financial health, or you know, where you're at financially, and a terrible credit score may indicate financial distress. So the short answer there is absolutely.
Okay, great. Next question for Andrew. What is the burden of proof for the arson corner of the triangle? From a fire investigation standpoint, greater than 51% chance with no other probable cause can be classified as probable arson if the investigator determines that arson was only one of a few potential hypotheses. What is burden of proof to complete the arson triangle?
Sure, absolutely. So, and this is one of the issues we run into with burden of proof is it often starts in a criminal context, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. So when charges aren't laid, then there's a pushback from an insured or from their counsel saying, well, you know, the police didn't think there was anything here. Different standard for us, and Michelle talked about this when she's preparing her report, is a balance of probabilities. So, you know, often there is more than one hypothesis, but on a balance of probabilities, can Michelle provide a report that says more likely than not, this is the cause of the fire? And you know, that's the standard we're looking at for that one corner of the arson triangle.
Great, thank you. Next question. Is anyone seeing alcohol-based hand sanitizer as a common accelerant? Is there anything unique about fire patterns with this type of accelerant?
Ooh. I think it's going to depend on what type. So is it the gel type or the spray? And it's going to depend also a lot on the evaporative qualities of the type that's being used. So anything can be sprayed and ignited on a surface. I don't know necessarily if that particular mode has been used more. I know it's more readily available for sure, but you know, I haven't sounds like I need to burn something in my backyard using my fire pit and some hand sanitizer this weekend. You know what? I don't know. I guess the short answer is I don't know. One of the only ways I really would know is if I had a particular really great fire, clearly and intentionally set fire, and I was able to get to the fire in time to take a good sample that was sent away, and it was definitely a positive hit, and it came back as that type of accelerant used. I will tell you that even in the last 6 months since the pandemic has started, I have not gone through that sequence of steps.
Great. Well, that takes us to the conclusion, guys, of the presentation. I want to thank Michelle, Bradley, and Andrew Graham for joining us and presenting today. What a fun set of slides that you've taken us through, guys. We appreciate your time. And thank you all for joining us. We have our last session taking place in 10 minutes, so we have an opportunity for a little bit of a break. And the next session will be on structural damages. So make sure you stay tuned. Thank you once again. And anyone dropping off, have a great day, and thank you all for joining us.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks, George.
Thank you. I've also kept Michelle and Andrew's contact information on the screen for you guys in case you do want to reach out to them